Good evening. Welcome to ALH. Thank you for finding your way down here. This is a really busy time at Clark, and so finding space for events like this can be a bit challenging. So we really appreciate you making your way through the maze that is the Clark campus and finding your way to us this evening. My name is Michael Knock, and on behalf of the Mackin-Mailander Committee, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's lecture with Clark alum Jessica DuBois. Thank you so much for joining us. The Mackin-Mailander Lecture Series was established in 1997 after Clark received gifts from Mary Mackin and Verna Slattery Mailander to establish an endowed lecture series. The lecture series throughout the year features a prominent outside speaker, faculty, and alumni lectures. A few notes about tonight's event. Jessica's talk is titled A Work in Progress. She will speak for 45 to 50 minutes or so, and then we will open things up for Q&A. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. There will be refreshments out in the lobby after tonight's event. The theme for our arts and lecture offerings this academic year is a work in progress. All of us, no matter our age, is a work in progress. We are all constantly involved in a process whereby we are trying to figure out who we are and who we want to be. For students, the theme may apply to their major. Do I want to study biology or history? It may apply to a summer internship or a job. Now, one thing that might surprise some of our students, however, is that most of us continue to be a work in progress even after we leave Clark. While some of you might settle on your life's work in your 20s, that's great. Others will continue to figure themselves out in their 30s, their 40s, maybe even later in life. I'm a good example of this. At 56 years of age, I am on my 4th different career since I graduated from college a very, very long time ago. In other words, the paths we choose in life change as we grow and discover who we are and who we want to be. Our speaker tonight, Jessica DuBois, is a great role model for this path of discovery. A 2017 Clark graduate, Jessica writes that a work in progress is the story of her adult life. After experiencing a life-altering moment, she began work as a paraprofessional in the Dubuque Community Schools. That experience led her to return to college to get her degree in elementary education. Despite the challenge of having to juggle a full class schedule, a job, and her family, Jessica found her path, and now she is a 4th grade teacher at Prescott Elementary here in Dubuque. We are extremely grateful to Jessica for her willingness to share her story with us this evening and to be our Mackin-Mailander Alumni Lecturer for 2022-23. Please join me in welcoming Jessica DuBois.
Thank you all so much for coming. I am truly, truly honored to be here as a Clark alum. Michael shared that I did graduate in 2017 with a Bachelor of Arts in Elementary Education. I knew I was a wife, a mom of 5 kids. I knew when I graduated that if I didn't keep going, there was no way in the world I would convince myself that going back to school later to get my master's was going to be a good idea. So I continued right away and did the online master's program through Clark here and graduated in 2020 virtually with my master's in educational leadership. I am really, truly honored to share this story with you tonight. Beth Putnam was the faculty advisor who contacted me and asked if I would be willing to be the alumni lecturer. And my first thought is, when I read the email, why me? And then she went on to explain that the lecture series was entitled A Work in Progress, and I knew exactly why she had asked. Tonight I'm going to share a very personal story. Lots of ups and downs, but eventually I found my place, and I love where I'm at. I have 5 amazing kids, I have a wonderful husband, and I love my job teaching 4th grade at Prescott. This is not just my story, though. It wasn't just me along the way. It also contained, oh goodness, these people in this picture. This is my family. This is why I chose to make the changes I made, because these people back here are the most important people. This is my husband, Ron. Ron and I have been married. We just, a few weeks ago, celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. We met 13 years ago. When we met, I was coming out of a very, very, very difficult situation. I was terrified to enter a new relationship, and yet he was kind, he was caring, he was loving. He helped us heal, not just me, but our kids. And I was a single mom of 4 kids. So not only did he, I always say he's a saint, because he not only asked a woman out, a single mom of 4 kids, out on a date, he fell in love with not only me, but our kids, and he has stepped into a parent role that my kids desperately needed. This is our oldest daughter, Haley. Haley is 24. She lives in Nashville, Tennessee. She graduated from St. Ambrose University in Davenport 2 years ago, and with a degree in communications and multimedia journalism. She is now working as a children and youth ministry special coordinator in a Lutheran church just outside of Nashville, and she loves her job. She is my constant reminder to hold on to my faith. She also has not had an easy journey, and she's been the one who's been with me the most. She's been the one who's seen me at my very worst and seen me at my very best. This is my daughter, Ella. Ella will turn 18 in May and is graduating from Dubuque Senior. I'm only slightly bitter about that and leaving home. She's leaving me with 4 boys. But she will attend, she's actually, thankfully, gonna stay in town. She's just moving out of my house. And she is gonna attend NICC next fall in their radiology program. Ella is also a competitive dancer, and one of my most favorite things to do is watch her on stage. She dances completely with her heart and soul, and it is gorgeous to watch. I am going to desperately miss those sitting with her. I do have another dancer, but sitting with her next year. This is Brennan. Brennan is 16. He is a sophomore at Senior. Brennan has the biggest personality and will wrap you in an instant. He also is highly devoted to his health. He works out, he takes care of himself. He also runs on Senior's track team, and thankfully just started track. I am not a big sports person. Sports was never a part of my life, my growing up, but I love being the parent in the stands, yelling and screaming for him as he's running past. This is our son, Chase. Chase is a freshman at Senior. Chase is very quiet and shy and introverted. However, this year at Senior as a freshman, he joined the speech and theater team and has truly found his place. He has competed in a team event for speech, and most recently was just awarded a chance to perform at All-State in the individual speech event that will take place on Monday. It is so great to watch him grow into his person and who he really is meant to be, and he's given himself a voice. And then this is our baby. Cooper came along after Ron and I had met. I was a single mom of 4. We were now a family of 4. And Ron was crazy enough to let me convince him that one more would be a really great idea. And Cooper envelops everybody's personality. He is 9, going on 35. He has a vocabulary like no other. His thought processes are crazy. He just makes the 2 of us giggle. He'll say something and I'm like, "You're 8, where did that come from?" He is also a competitive dancer. He is also an incredibly talented dancer, and it is so much fun to sit in the stands. It's kind of, as a mom, kind of fun to sit in the stands and just listen to the people around you when he dances, because everybody's like, what is he, how does he do that? He is the perfect bookend to our family. So like I said, this story is not just my story. It is all of our stories. It wasn't just me who walked through this process. My story begins at 18. I was getting ready to graduate high school. I knew I was going to be a teacher because many people in my family were in education. And in the late 90s, the place that you went to go to college when you were a teacher was the University of Northern Iowa. We didn't tour any other schools. I didn't go anywhere else. I knew that that's where I was going. So I packed up. My mom dropped me off, gave me a great hug. I cried as I walked back to the dorm, and I was ready to do this. And then I wasn't. My year at UNI started out okay. Just like any college freshman, the first time away from home, there are those challenges. You're trying to figure out your path and what it means to be on your own. Unfortunately for me, I got in my head. I felt very alone. I felt like I didn't belong there. I didn't know where I belonged, and it didn't feel good. And pretty soon that not feeling good consumed my every waking thought. And when that happens, you shut down, or at least I did. I shut down. It was difficult to get out of bed to go to class. It was difficult to get up and meet new friends. It became very difficult to go home, because what was then happening was I started to fail classes. And not only did I feel like I didn't belong, like this wasn't right, like I had made a whole lot of wrong decisions, I now felt like I was failing. I was failing at life. I couldn't do it. I was failing my family. I was a failure. That was where I lived. That was the headspace I lived in my first year at UNI. It was really easy to push people away when you're in college an hour and a half from home. Nobody had to see you. I didn't have to talk to them. I didn't have to tell them I was not doing okay. Instead, I avoided it. I didn't talk about it. Back in the late 90s, mental health was not a conversation you had. It was not something that was out there for people. There were not resources on campus. There may have been, probably, but not resources that we talk readily about. I also am not 100% sure, even now, even a lot of years later, I'm not even 100% sure that I was aware of what I was thinking and feeling. I was not conscious enough to be able to say to my family even, I'm not okay. All I knew was that I was shutting down, and it was easier to block out the world. I hit the end of my first year at UNI, and I either had a choice. I was going to be on pretty significant academic probation for the following year, or I wasn't going back. I made the decision to not go back. I also did not do a good job of telling my family that I was not going back. Towards the end of that year, before I had kind of made the decision that I couldn't do this anymore, I wasn't going back. I didn't know, I had zero clue what was going to happen next. I just knew it wasn't going to be at UNI. Then I met my first husband. His name was Ken, and for the little time we were together, I was certain he was the answer to all of the problems. I was in such a dark, dark place at that time that I ignored every red flag in that relationship, and there were a lot. I had convinced myself that what was going to be best for me was him. I left home, we got married, and we had Haley. And it didn't get any better. And every red flag was still there, and they were screaming at me. But I had already failed college. I had already felt like I had failed my family. I was not going to fail this marriage. Because those feelings of being inadequate, of being a failure, of disappointing my family, of not feeling like I belonged, never went away. They were just masked. I was trying, and I'm not sure I was very successful. I wanted to feel like I was successful, but I was masking what I was feeling. It took about 1.5 years before I realized I could no longer deny the red flags. He was having an affair. I couldn't do this anymore. So that marriage ended, and guess what? That feeling of being a failure consumed me again. And it consumed me harder and stronger. And when you're in that place, what I did was I just kept pushing family further and further away, because there was no way I wanted them in to see that. I already knew I was a failure. I didn't want them to have to see it too. The problem was, I now had a little girl that I had to take care of. So for the next few years, about 5, we struggled a lot. I jumped from job to job because I didn't go to school, I didn't know what I wanted to be. At that point, I figured I'd failed school, so there was no way I was going to be a teacher. That was done and over with. I tried everything, including radio advertising sales. I was selling radio advertisement. I am a terrible salesman, by the way. It was not good. Not a job I should have taken. But I was literally grasping at anything that would give me the sense that I wasn't a failure and that I belonged there. And I didn't find it for a very long time. We jumped from house to house. I jumped from job to job. I was doing anything and everything I could to make ends meet, except be willing to acknowledge what was happening in my head. By not acknowledging that, I let us live in that space for a very long time. Then, during this time, I was also coaching the senior high school color guard. When I was in high school, I was on the color guard, and my coach in high school, her name was Steph King. She was still coaching after I had graduated, and she asked me to come back as her assistant. And we coached for a very long time. We coached together for about 8 years, and we were a dynamic coaching team. Our color guard team won state year after year after year after year. It grew. We became a force to be reckoned with in the state of Iowa. It was the only thing during that time I didn't feel like I was failing at. She also became my best friend. If I was not at my house, I was at her house. During that time at her house, I re-met her brother. I say re-met because when I was on her team, as a high school student, we would travel to Des Moines to compete in state contests. And we would often stay at her parents' house. They lived in Aiken. And I met her brother when I was in high school. He was a few years older than I was, and he was already graduated from high school. But I knew him, so it wasn't like I was meeting somebody new for the first time. But when I re-met him in 2004, all of a sudden I thought, oh, this is gonna be good, right? Everything I was feeling is gonna go away. This is gonna be magic. Because I knew his family, I was close with his sister, this was going to be where I could change. What I wasn't prepared for was that was exactly what happened in that relationship. I changed, not anywhere in the way I thought I was going to. We started dating. I found out I was pregnant with Ella, and we got married shortly after Ella was born. Ella was born in May. We were married in the summer. The first probably year of our marriage was not bad. It was actually pretty good. He had moved here from Aiken. He had some trouble finding a job, but he was able to be the stay-at-home parent for Ella. And he took care of Ella. And we didn't have daycare. It was great. Unfortunately, what happened, when I re-met him in 2004, he had been recovering from a very significant back injury. Because of that back injury, he was placed on some pretty intense medications. It didn't take him long to become addicted to those medications. He went from addicted to the medications to addicted to vodka. And about a year into our marriage, it got really ugly. He was drinking like crazy. I was a para at Prescott. I worked during the day. He had found a job. He was working second shift at Village Inn, so he would work from 11 o'clock or 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., which means that he was gone from work when I came home, and I was in bed when he came home. So for a very long time, it was really easy to ignore the drinking because we weren't ever in the same place. Unfortunately, the drinking got worse and worse and worse, and I could no longer ignore it because we would get paid, and 2 days later we'd be out of money because he'd, at 11 o'clock, get off work and think, she's not awake. And he'd go to the bars and he'd drink all night. And it was through that time, he got his first DUI, and we had 4 kids at that time. He had a daughter from his first marriage who was the same age as Haley, so we had custody of her. So we had Haley, his daughter Shelby, Ella, and Brennan had come along. And now he couldn't drive because he had a DUI. So I had to pick up a lot of the slack again. In the spring of 2008, we found out we were pregnant with Chase. I was at my breaking point. Remember those thoughts of being a failure that I had all of those years? They didn't go away. They were still consuming my thoughts. And I thought, God, I can't do another failed marriage. I just can't do it. So I said to, his name was Scott, I said to Scott, we can't do this anymore. We cannot live like this anymore. He had lost his job at that point at Village Inn. We had very little money. We were scrambling to get by. I said, we gotta do something. We have to do something. And he looked at me and he says, if we lived in Ankeny, everything would be different. Ankeny is where I'm from. I know I can get a job there. I know that there's people to support me. And as a last-ditch effort, because there wasn't anything else I could do, I said, fine. If you're telling me that Ankeny is the answer to our problems, then let's go. But you have to figure this out because I'm still holding life together here. You're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have 3 kids. We're going to have 5 kids in a little bit. We're going to have 3 under 3. Me, one of us, going back to work probably doesn't make a lot of sense because all we're going to do is pay for daycare. And at this point, we don't have money to move to Ankeny. So I'm not sure how you're going to make this happen, but if you're telling me this is the answer to our problems, then figure it out. And he did. He found a job working at Buffalo Wild Wings. He talked to his parents and asked if we could come stay with them. They were gracious enough to open their house to 7 of us. We moved into their basement shortly after Chase was born. That was the single worst decision and best decision I ever made. We were in Ankeny for a year and a half. It was the hardest year and a half of my life. Because going to Ankeny not only didn't solve our problems, it blew them up. Because just like I was dealing with a lot of negative thoughts, so was he. He was thinking, I'm a husband, I can't provide for my family, and now I'm living with my 5 kids in the basement of my parents' house. put that negative thought with addiction. The addiction exploded. And so did his anger. And his anger was directed right at me. If it wasn't directed at me, it was directed at his mom. And usually it was only directed at his mom when she was standing up for me. I spent the year and a half with him screaming at me day after day after day. He would get right in my face. I can still, to this day, picture exactly what his face looked like when he was screaming at me. And he was always screaming at me with a cocked fist. And every day, I wondered if this was the day I was going to get hit. In February of 2010, end of January, it was beginning of February, first week of February of 2010, we had had a particularly difficult night with him. Let me back up. In the process of all of this, not only was he screaming at me, he was drinking, he was overtaking his medication, and it was destroying his body. And so he spent weeks in the hospital. And every time you go to the hospital, the doctor would say, you have to stop this. You have to stop drinking. You have to stop overtaking your meds. This is what is causing the problems. And he'd say, okay. And he'd come home and he'd do it again. And he'd end up right back in the hospital. So he was destroying his body. He was incredibly sick. So he was in and out of the hospital. And his hospital was in Des Moines. Now, Ankeny and Des Moines aren't huge. It's not a far distance. It was probably a 20-minute drive. But I was doing that week after week with 5 small kids at home. Thankfully, his parents were wonderful and stepped in and helped take care of the kids when we needed, or I could stay home with the kids and his mom would go sit at the hospital. We did this day after day. He also got, during this time, his second DUI. This time, I knew he had been drinking. I took his keys. We had a key hanger right inside the door where we hung our keys. I knew he had been drinking, and I thought, dang it, I'm taking his keys. Took his keys, and I hit him. Apparently not very well, because he found them. And it wasn't long after that when I was looking out the window and saw him running across. There was a church with a big yard behind our house. And I saw him running across the yard, and I'm thinking, what in the world is he doing? First of all, I don't think I've ever seen him run. Second of all, I realized he was running with no shoes. So I was like, what is happening? This is not a scene I know. So I walked out our side door and met him on the driveway. And as I met him on the driveway, he had blood gushing from his head, and he went unconscious, dropped on the driveway right in front of me. Still had no idea what had happened. I just knew he was now bleeding from his head. He was laying on our driveway, and he was unconscious. Called for help. We called the ambulance. They came and took him. His dad then went to go figure out what had happened, found his car on the block behind us, slammed head first into a telephone pole. He had pulled out, they were doing construction on our road, so we were parking in that field of the church behind us. He pulled out of that field and drove directly into a telephone pole, kitty corner from the driveway. We spent the next several days in the hospital. He was in the ICU. He was unconscious for quite a while, 24 hours maybe. When he woke up, could not tell me who I was. He knew me, but he didn't know who I was. Once he was awake and conscious, they moved him to a regular room. And when he was in that regular room, I was sitting with him, and he was saying, I wish I would have hit the pull harder. I should have just hit it harder. I wish I would have hit it harder. So I went to his doctor, and I'm like, he's saying these things, and he says, I'll get a psych on. I'll have a psych come in and talk to him. I said, fantastic, because he's not okay. The psychiatrist came in to meet with him and said, can your wife sit in on this? And he said, yes. So I sat next to him. I was right to his right. We were shoulder to shoulder, so he really couldn't see me. The psychiatrist started to ask him questions. Do you drink too much? His answer was no. I went, "Are you overtaking your meds?" He said, "No." I went. The psychiatrist stopped and said, "Are you sure you're telling me the true answers?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Your wife is saying something different." That literally sent him over the edge, and he pulled his IV out and jumped across the bed at me. The psychiatrist, I don't know how he was as fast as he was. He jumped up, he got in between us, he shoved me out the door, and they called hospital security. There was a decision at that point whether we were going to involuntarily commit him or if he was going to make the choice to go himself. Unfortunately, he made the choice to go himself. First I thought, yes, thank goodness, maybe we'll get the help we need. If you voluntarily commit yourself, you can sign yourself out after 24 hours. And that is exactly what he did. 24 hours later, I'm at home, I'm thinking, oh, we get a breather, we can relax a little bit. And I get a phone call that says, he's being released, you can come pick him up. And I went, what? So I drove to Des Moines and I picked him up. I quizzed him all the way home because he still didn't remember who I was. I wasn't sure if he was going to remember who the kids were, and I needed him to at least know who the kids were before we walked in the door. I didn't want the kids to see him not remembering them. Thankfully, he remembered all the kids. For a few days after that, things were pretty good. He had stopped drinking, or so we thought. It didn't appear as if he was drinking. We had taken control, his mom and I had taken control of his meds. We kept him in a locked cabinet and only gave them to him when he needed them. Then his mom and I took the two older girls, Haley and Shelby, who was his daughter from his first marriage, out for a few hours. And we knew his dad was going to be there with them. We knew we were going to be okay because his dad was there. We left for a few hours with the big kids to get them out. We did some shopping, we did some other things, and we came back and he was passed out on the couch. The second we were out of the door, he was drinking and passed out on the couch. Ella, who was 5 at that time, with her brothers who were 3 and a year and a half, said to me, "Mom, Daddy was sick today. Don't worry, I took care of the boys." At 5, I was livid. His mom was even more livid, and she went and confronted him. And that was the night that it was particularly ugly. He yelled at her, he screamed at her, he kept telling her he was going to punch her. You name it, he said it. And that night I said to her, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this. I can't let my boys see that this is how you treat someone you love. And I can't let my girls grow up thinking that this is how their relationship is supposed to work. And so her and I sat for hours that night talking about what our plans were and what needed to happen. She asked me if I was going to stay in Ankeny, and I said, I don't think I can. I said, I don't trust that me just moving out of a house to another house, apartment in Ankeny where he can get to us is going to be okay. I said, I think I need to go back to Dubuque. And she said, okay. That was a Saturday. Monday had come. During all of this time, I decided to go back to become a massage therapist. And guess what? I was really good, and I passed. And I became a certified massage therapist, and I finally was not a failure at something. And I loved my job. I got connected with a chiropractor in Polk City, which is just outside of Ankeny, and I worked there every day. It was fantastic. I loved what I was doing. So I was working on Monday. My mother-in-law, at the time, was going to head to a play with some friends of hers. So there was going to be about an hour gap between when she was going to be gone and when I was going to be back. Again, his dad was going to be home. The older girls, who were old enough to babysit, they were in 4th grade, were there. I knew it was only going to be an hour. I'll be there. I was on my way home, and I got a frantic call from Haley. You have to come home. You have to come right home. You have to come home right now. Scott's yelling, crying, and screaming that he's hurting. You need to come home. I said, Haley, I'm about 4 blocks away. I'll be there very shortly. I walked in the house, and she was sitting in a rocking chair, and she was rocking really hard. And she's like, Mom, it's really bad. It's really bad. It's really bad. And I said, it's okay. I didn't see him anywhere. Typically, he'd get angry and he'd shut himself off in the bedroom, which is what he had done. I was like, I'll go in and check on him. I opened the door and could smell the alcohol. And I said, I'm sorry. I don't feel sorry for you anymore. You know that this is what's going to hurt you. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do. And he got up and came after me. And again started screaming at me, yelling, threatening to punch me. And I said, Scott, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And then I said something that I, in hindsight, probably shouldn't have. I said, you're at a point where you can't even take care of your kids. He said, what do you mean? I said, your mom and I left with the big kids for a couple of hours, and I come home and you're passed out on the couch, and our 5-year-old says to me, don't worry, Mom, I took care of the boys. Daddy was sick. And he went after Ella. He started to go after Ella. And I stood in front of him. And he got right in my face. He goes, what do you think you're doing? And I said, right now, I'm protecting my kids from you. And he goes, you mean I'm protecting my kids from you? And I said, I'm not the one out of control right now. And he got angry and he turned around and he went back into his bedroom and he slammed the door. Again, I thought, great, this is going to be the end. He'll live this off. I know I have a plan in place. I need to start working on that now. Because we had talked about it on Saturday, but there had been no other plans. I hadn't gone any further with it yet because it was just 2 days later. I go back into the living room to try and calm Haley down because she's still rocking. He's coming after you, Mom. He's coming after you. I said, no, he's not. I said, and he's sitting in his bedroom. He's not going to come out the rest of the night. All of a sudden, the door flew open. And screaming at the top of his lungs, he's saying, I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill her. Her is the operative word in that sentence I learned later. I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill her. About 3 weeks before that, I had been meeting with our pastor at our church. And he looked at me and he goes, do you feel safe? I said, no, not really. And he said, let's put a safety plan in place. Just in case you might need it. And I was like, I don't think I'll need a safety plan. He's never put his hands on me. He just yells at me. And he goes, let's put a safety plan in place. So we've made a safety plan. The plan was, if it got too bad, I was going to take the kids and I was going to go to his house. And I was going to park in his garage because then you couldn't see my car. And we would figure out the situation from there. So when Scott stormed out of his bedroom that night, screaming, I'm going to kill her, I'm going to kill her, I'm going to kill her, I said, safety plan, we're putting this in place. I began gathering all of the kids. 5 kids. I suddenly can find nobody's shoes. And it's the beginning of February. I'm running around the house trying to find everybody's shoes. I find everybody but the 2 boys. I don't have Brennan's shoes and I don't have Chase's shoes. Well, they're 3 and a year and a half. I said, we're picking them up and we're taking them out of the house. They're going without shoes. Our house at the time had a long driveway and it had a side door, which is where we came in and out of all the time. When you came in the side door, the right was the kitchen, the left was the living room, and straight in front of you was the stairs to the basement. I gathered the kids, except for his daughter, Shelby. She refused to come with me. I learned later that night, or actually it was the next day, that Scott had been filling her head with all kinds of things about what a horrible person I was and what I was doing to him, and that it was all my fault that he was the way he was. So she was really angry at me and refused to come with me. I knew his dad was still there, so I had to leave her. I had to get the rest of the kids out. We're standing at the top of the steps, ready to go out the door, and I hear Haley scream behind me. I look down the stairs, and he's coming up the stairs with a shotgun pointed right at me, screaming, I'm going to kill her, I'm going to kill her. What felt like minutes was really only a few seconds before his dad was there. He stopped him, pushed him down the steps, got the gun out of his hands. I left with the kids. Went to the pastor's house. I eventually called the police to make a report. The police took the report, however, did nothing with it because he said, I'm going to kill her, and not I'm going to kill you. That word was the biggest difference in our police report. They took the gun that day, but that was all I could do. I knew then that my plan to leave Dubuque could no longer wait, and we immediately put plans in place to try and get us back. Haley came back a few weeks early and stayed with my mom for a while, so she could get started at the next trimester here in town. She started school at Prescott, and then I came a few weeks later. I had failed another marriage, but the difference that time, when I left, I was no longer thinking that I was a failure, because I had a marriage end, but I saved myself, and I saved my kids, and I went back to school. And I got my degree, or I got a license to be a massage therapist. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't failing everybody. We moved back to Dubuque. I would love to stand here and tell you our move back to Dubuque, our time right after we had moved back was easy. It wasn't. I was a single mom of 4 kids. I tried to open my massage therapy practice here in town, and it wasn't working. I wasn't getting clients, and it got to a point where I had to make some decisions, because now I'm a single mom and I got 4 kids. So I became a para. I also took a job at St. Luke's United Methodist Church as the youth ministry coordinator. And I loved my jobs. And I realized very quickly that teaching really was where I was supposed to be. We left in February. I met Ron in August, 6 months later. Let me tell you, it wasn't an easy transition, because I was still healing. I was still trying to overcome what we had been through in Ankeny. I was still trying to carry my children through this. But he was patient, and he was kind, and he took the lead from me and the kids. And we dated till October before I introduced him to the kids. And it probably would have been longer, but I had a mouse in my house. And I was not about to catch the mouse. I called my first thought was, I'm gonna call my grandpa. He's gonna make this. He handed me a bag with mouse traps in it. Said, here. I was like, that's not what I wanted you to do. So I still have this mouse. I have 4 kids who are freaked out about this mouse. I know that if I said to Ron, I have a mouse in my house, I need you to come catch it, he would have been there in an instant. But first I had to say to him, we need to talk. I need you to know what this is, because I need to know if you're in this for the long haul, because I'm not going to introduce my kids to somebody else. And he said, I'm not going anywhere. I said, okay, come catch my mouse. So he came to catch my mouse, and he caught it really quickly, actually. He also helped us carve pumpkins that night. And I really thought he was going to walk out that night, because he was helping my 16, who is now 16, he was not 16 at the time, my son Brennan, carve a pumpkin. You know, pumpkin feels really weird to some kids. It's a textural thing. So Brennan didn't like to put his hands in the pumpkin. So Brennan stood very diligently next to Ron on a chair with a spoon. Ron would dig it out, put it on a spoon, and Brennan would go out onto the table. They got totally done, got the pumpkin cleared, and Brennan stands up, because he had been leaned over, as Ron is now diligently trying to carve the face in the pumpkin. Brennan stands up and goes, woo, that was hard work. I just lost my words, but I'll say that later. Woo, that was hard work. Ron literally stops in mid-cut, looks at me across the table, and I'm like, sorry? And he smiles, shrugs it off, and he's been with us since. And he has been the calming to our crazy. He has been the healer, because it hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been the easy process. Eventually, I decided it was time for me to go back to school, but because of what I had been through, I was terrified to tell him that, because I didn't know what his reaction would be, because any time I had told Scott what I wanted, it was met with screaming, yelling. So I held on to it for a really long time. And I finally looked at him and I said to Ron, I need to talk to you. I really, really, really want to go back to school. And I really want to go back to school to be a teacher. And he looks at me and he goes, okay, when are you going to start? And I went, oh, Okay. So at that point, we had not gotten married yet and didn't have Cooper. I still had to work, so I did my first 2 years online through NICC. In those 2 years, we got married and had Cooper. Then it was time I had to make a decision and what I was going to do. So I went back to school. I came to Clark. I had to quit my full-time job. Ron was amazing and supported us through it all. He never questioned my decisions. Sometimes he would ask more clarifying questions, but he never questioned my choices. And I went back to school. I came to Clark. It was one of the best things I did. I was terrified to start at Clark because I was 35, married, had 5 kids. The students that were in my class were going to be closer to my daughter's age than they were to me. That was a little weird. And I didn't live on campus, so I was like, this is, I'm just going to go, I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to be there. And I'm going to leave. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought I made such connections. I have 2 people who I went to school with sitting right back there. One of them I see every day because she teaches with me at Prescott. I didn't go out every night. Although they tried, they kept saying, come on, you should come out with us. I said, I have a 1-year-old at home. He wakes up at the crack of dawn. I'm not going out with you. I didn't pull all-nighters. They knew that by 8:30, 9 o'clock, not to message Jessica if you have a question on your work because she's probably already in bed, ask her the next day. But I did it, and I graduated, and I got a job, and I work at an amazing school with amazing people and amazing kids. And one of the reasons why I chose to do what I did and where I'm at is because of what I've been through. Because I know what it's like to live in trauma. I know what it's like to have those negative thoughts all the time. I hear from my kids, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. I have continued to grow and learn. Once I found that I had a job that I loved, I knew it was time to start to heal my mind and my heart. I got my 95-hour kids yoga certification, immediately went in and got my 200-hour certification, and through that process, more than anything, I could teach yoga if I wanted to, but more than anything, it helped me make sense of what I had gone through. Because yes, there were some terrible things done to me, but I also made some really, really, really bad choices. I began to see that it wasn't just my fault or somebody else's fault or my fault. We all owned a piece of it. I owned a piece of it. I made those mistakes. I made some bad choices. For a long time, I was stuck in that area. I was stuck in that mindset. You make bad choices, you don't get to move on. That's what I lived in for a long time. Throughout my adult life, and I want to leave you with 5 things I've learned. 1, you are going to make mistakes. Tell my students this every day. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. If you didn't make a mistake, there is no reason for me to be up here teaching you. Nobody is perfect. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to make a bad decision. What matters is what you do about it. For a long time, I made a lot of bad decisions and did nothing about it. I lived in it and just shut people out because that's how I could cope. 1, there are always consequences for your decisions. Some are going to be really, really great. My 5 kids are perfect examples of that. Didn't make really great choices in their fathers, but I have 5 incredible kids. Some consequences are not always going to be that great. I'm still trying to dig out in some of the mistakes that I made. But I own them now, at least. 3, you are not defined by your mistakes. When I was 18 and had the first day that I didn't go to a class, or the first time I realized I was failing, in my head, I was a failure, I was always going to be a failure, and nothing was going to change that. That was what my definition of myself was. I now make a mistake. I make mistakes in front of my kids all the time. And I'm like, well, that was crazy. Like, we gotta fix this. What we're doing isn't working. I tell my kids that they can have a problem in my classroom, have to leave, they come back, that what I want to do first is welcome them back. I would love to be able to stop and give everybody a big old giant hug when they come back in. Sometimes that's not always feasible, but I promise you, when that kid walks back through my classroom door, my first words are, I am so glad to see you back. Because you are not defined by your mistakes. 4, you are never too old. It says young, sorry. Goodness. Never too old to try something new. I was 35 before I went back to school. 35, married with 5 kids. Nobody, let me tell you, nobody in their right mind thinks that's a good idea. That was crazy. 5, enjoy the life you've been given. You only get one. I love where I'm at right now. I have people ask me all the time, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I don't know, because this is where I saw myself. I'm right where I saw myself. I don't know. One last thought before I open it up for questions. And the people who know me and love me most will be not surprised by this quote. I'm going to leave you with a quote. This is a quote by Betty White. Betty White is my most favorite actress in the whole wide world. She starred in an 80s sitcom called The Golden Girls. I love them. I want to be them when I am their age. I know every episode by heart. Betty White says, you are never too old for anything. She embodied this quote. I challenge you, you're going to come to rough times. I challenge you, what can you do to grow from them? My journey wasn't easy. My journey wasn't always pretty. My journey wasn't always marked by smart choices. But I did it. I graduated. I have an amazing family. I have a job I love. So don't let yourself get wrapped up in the hard. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for Bessie?
Yes.
So it's not really pertinent, but
That's okay.
it's more curiosity.
Yeah.
Did your second husband ever get himself clean?
No.
And whatever happened to him?
Good question. His parents moved to Dubuque a long time ago. I can't even remember how long ago. Left him in Ankeny for a while. Couldn't take care of himself there, so he moved here to Dubuque. He is clean from what I know. I do see him. My kids see him. I'm still very close with their family. He can't live on his own, so he lives in an assisted living. He is, he's like maybe 48, 49. So his health has taken a significant toll, but he is here. I've been around him. I've seen him. Some days are easier than others to be around. He made a phone call this summer about how it wasn't fair that I got the kids all the time. That kind of sent me into a little tailspin for a while, but yeah, so he's here. He's I think, doing as well as he can. Yes?
With what he and like Shelby said, did you ever make a did you ever?
That's a great question. So Shelby and I were really estranged for a long time, and then it was probably in the last year. She was married and now has 2 little kids and was going through a pretty ugly divorce, and something kind of similar to what I did, and so I reached out to her and we did make amends, and we have talked, and she actually came homecoming weekend and spent the weekend. She brought the kids and stayed at our house, at my house, with her siblings, and did homecoming activities with them. So yes, we have worked through all of that. Yeah.
I was curious about this.
Yeah.
Especially as an older, non-traditional student coming back. What was that first day like in a classroom here in Clark?
Oh, I was
The very
terrified.
first time?
I was terrified. I was like, I feel like a fish out of water. I was like crazy. Michael was one of my professors when I was here, and I was like, I'm too old for this. Like, what in the world am I doing here, was my first thought. But it was, there were a million different thoughts and feelings. Overwhelmed, like questioning every decision, like why did you think this was a good idea? But it really didn't take long until the students in my classes, even some of the gen ed classes I took, because I had failed UNI, I had to start really from scratch. And so I had to really take lots of gen ed classes. And everybody, and then I'm standing at graduation and I have kids, 22, 21-year-old guys come up and give me these giant hugs. You made it! But yeah, it's weird. Really, really weird. Yes?
Do you remember my mom, Melissa DeMola?
I do! I do! I had you for biology or something, didn't we? Yeah. Nancy?
What did Clark University do to help you keep on keeping on?
Yep. The thing, and this is the thing I wish I would have known when I was 18, or wish I would have explored more when I was 18. UNI was too big for me. Clark is small. I knew every professor. I had kids in all of my classes. The PDS schools, I was in the ed department, we had PDS schools. I had hands-on experience. I loved being in those classrooms. It was in actual classrooms, teaching actual kids all day morning long. But it was the connection. And the thing is I am still connected to Clark. I have Clark PDS students in my classroom right now. I have professors who reach out, who check in. I have friends who I went to school with, who I now teach with. It was exactly what I needed. I probably needed all along. It was the close connection. It was the small school, the direct, immediate connection to staff and students. I knew that I could go to them if I needed to. And I had times, there was one time I was at a Fulton PDS, and Scott was still in a really bad place, and he was here in town, and his sister called me just as I was walking into class, and she said, Scott's gone missing, we have no idea where he is, please watch your back. I was like, well, he probably isn't going to know where I'm at, but that unnerved me. But I had professors I could go up to, and I said, can I talk to you? I need to tell you this. This is what's going on. I think I'm going to be fine, but I just need you to know that this is where my head is at right now. And they're like, no problem. And they made sure somebody walked out with me in the car that night. Everything was fine. I knew I was probably going to be fine, but I got in my head a little bit. But those Clark professors were right there to walk me through it. Yes?
Do you think if you made these connections or that helped for your mental health earlier in your life, would you have made some of these decisions later in your life or not do this stuff?
You're asking fantastic questions tonight, my friend. I'm quite impressed. That's a great question. I think it would be different. I really think if mental health had been as prevalent of a topic as it is now, that I think I would have been more, I would like to think I would be more aware. I also know it was pretty much in my head, so I'm not sure if I would have been. But I would have thought, I do think that if that was there, if I had a smaller community, things would have been different. I've been asked a lot if I would make different choices if I would go back. I really struggle with that question because I would like to say yes, and that's really, I truly believe that yes, I would love to go back, but I got some pretty amazing kids out of it, and I learned some pretty valuable lessons that I'm not sure I would have gotten. So, I don't know, it's a thought. Yes, I would love to go back so my family, my kids, everybody wouldn't have gone through it with me on the sidelines, watching from afar. I would have liked to not be able to hurt the people I love, but I got some pretty amazing kids, so I'll take that. Yes?
So one of the challenges you said you had was about talking to your parents.
Yeah.
And I think students still have some of those problems,
Yeah.
especially when they're going through things. like
Yeah.
that. What advice would you give students?
I'm
on
still
how to
working.
approach
I'm still working on that piece myself. But I do think it's really important. I think the biggest thing is when you find yourself feeling or hearing those thoughts, when you start thinking that, reach out to somebody. I don't even care who it is. Reach out to somebody somebody and say, this is what I'm thinking and feeling, and I don't feel okay. Like I said, my mom is here. I love her dearly. No, you're fine. You're fine. I love her dearly, and I would love to go back and be able to fix all of the things. And part of that is still some of my issues more than anything. It's still like, while all of those negative thoughts are gone, they still live in the back of my head, and I still get that, like, my dear husband makes fun of me because when there's anything big I need to talk to him about, I email him first. Because it's easier for me to email him, and he has it first before I face-to-face him. I mean, and we've been together 13 years. I mean, so those pieces still are there, but I encourage, like, the second you start to feel those thoughts, go talk to somebody. Talk to a parent, a friend, a teacher, a professor, you name it, talk to somebody. Go see a doctor. Yes, another great question, I'm ready.
Instead of moving back to Dubuque, would you have chosen any other place to move after, I don't remember.
Ankeny?
Yeah.
No, actually, I wouldn't have. I am really glad I came back to Dubuque for a lot of reasons. I have lots of family here. My kids have grown up with their cousins, and they're best friends with their cousins. And we do things together, and I don't think we would have had that if I had moved anyplace else. Nope, Dubuque is, I'm not moving anywhere. My husband has had multiple job opportunities in other cities, and he keeps coming to me and he goes, how about? And I'm like, nope.
3 seconds. Like, no.
Yep, yeah, it was about 3 seconds. He said to me, I got this really great job opportunity. I said, nope. And he goes, but it's a lot more money. I said, no, we're not going, I'm not going.
All right, well, can we please join me in thanking Jessica once again